Big Ten Media Days is upon us, which means it's the unofficial start of this season. Welcome once again to the Penn State on Voice of College Football, MarkRogersTV. I'm Tim Aiden, Black Sheep Diaries, joined per usual by my trusty colleague at BSD, Marty Leap. Marty, how you doing?
Pretty good. I know whenever me and Mark were kind of texting about this the other day and getting it set up, it's nice to have real football to talk about again. This past weekend, my oldest son was in an all-star tournament for baseball, and it was the two teams from our little league playing against each other. And I was talking to one of the other dads that I'm friends with afterwards, and he said, "Hey, I'll see you at football season." And man, there are a few better words in the world that can be spoken, than "see you at football season."
And speaking of which, 5 weeks from tomorrow is Penn State's season opener at Purdue under the lights on a Thursday night. First time in school history that's happening during the regular season, as far as we know. And of course, as a prelude to that, we had this is day 2 of Big Ten Media Days, and it did indeed start off with Jeff Brom going up first, Purdue's coach, and talked about how excited he was to play Penn State. But of course, I'm sure the Purdue show will cover that in depth. Though as far as Penn State's concerned, James Franklin, of course, all eyes were on him as he spoke this year, and he was sounding quite optimistic about the offense. Now, of course, I'm sure some of you watching this probably rolled your eyes at me saying that, or rolled your eyes when you were watching him say it live, but he certainly spoke glowingly of the position groups on offense. Quarterback, obviously Sean Clifford is going to be the starter, but he was a big fan of the competition that's forming behind Cliff between Christian Veilleux and the true freshmen, Drew Aller and Bo Perbula. Receivers, he does mention how much it hurts to lose Jahan Dotson, but he feels that the 3 starters, at this point would be Keandre Lambert-Smith, Parker Washington, and the Western Kentucky transfer, Mitchell Tinsley. Between the 3 of those, plus the overall depth, he thinks it can be a better position group overall than last year. He's also spoke highly of the tight ends room. He says he would line up against any other tight end room in the country. And we were all pretty optimistic last year about the tight ends group, and fell short of expectations. Hopefully they can live up to the billing this year. Running back, he sounded a similar tone. He's pretty high on Nick Singleton, just like the rest of us. It'll be interesting to see how that shakes out, how quickly. I think I've been on the record saying here before, I think he's going to grab the starting reins sooner rather than later. May not be game 1, but it's going to be sooner rather than later, if you ask me. And the O-line, he's not going to. He said he wouldn't say anything about his expectations for this year, but said he let that group do the talking. So you can interpret that however you want. If he's just got a quiet optimism, or if he just doesn't want to jinx it, or if that's just a sign that maybe he's not that confident. We'll see. But Marty, what are your overall thoughts about, the offense? Do you think you'd echo what James Franklin said today?
I think with Penn State's offense, it's very easy to both understand Franklin's optimism and understand the concern the fans have. You look at last year, and I know we have talked about this ad nauseum on this show. If Sean Clifford does not get hurt against Iowa, who knows where that season goes? I feel confident they don't just beat Iowa. They would have run Iowa out of that building. Mike Yurcich was coaching circles around that Iowa defensive staff that day. Clifford, outside of 2 interceptions, one of which wasn't really a bad throw, just a great play by the Hawkeyes, he was locked in. They were moving the ball. He doesn't get hurt. They win that game. They beat Illinois. Who knows where things go from there for Penn State? I know I saw Jahan Dotson said at Washington's rookie camp that he firmly believes if Sean Clifford doesn't get hurt, Penn State goes to college football playoff last year. And he might not be wrong. And again, with the confidence thing too, and with the optimism, this is something Sean talked about a lot today with the BTN crew. How nice it is to be able to master an offense. You know, in all his years as a starter, this is the first time he's getting the same offense coordinator in back-to-back years, which is crazy because this is his fourth year as a starter for Penn State. But he had Ricky Ronnie in 2019, Kirk Shiraka in 2020, Mike Yursich in 2021. And prior to getting hurt, it looked like he really was starting to get full control of that Yursich offense. So, you know, now that he has his offseason, not trying to learn the offense, but master it, I think that will go a long way. You mentioned Franklin talking about the receivers and the tight ends. You know, the receivers, first and foremost, I think can be very good. Parker Washington might be the most underrated receiver in college football, if you ask me. Mitchell Tinsley was an absolute dude for Western Michigan last year. And the thing is with Tinsley, yes, he's going from Western Michigan to Penn State, but I think one thing that people don't talk about enough with him, he's not going to be the defense's primary concern with the Nittany Lions still. It's going to be Parker Washington. So I think that will also work in his favor. Keandre Lambert-Smith has all the tools in the world, was really starting to put together at the end of last season. Even behind them, Malik Mega, you know, probably still has some growth and development to go, but he's a guy who's probably good for one big play, you know, if not every game, every other game. And Trey Wallace, a receiver that I like a lot. And the tight ends, I am on record as saying that I thought there was no position on this team to underachieve more last year than the tight ends. In my opinion, they have 3 tight ends that could easily play in the NFL in Theo Johnson, Tyler Warren, and Brenton Strange, with Theo Johnson being, you know, one of the most gifted athletic freaks in the Big Ten. And you look at running back, everything you said about Singleton ditto that, man. Like, this kid is special. You never want to do this. I feel like at Penn State, there are 2 players you never compare people to, and they are Saquon Barkley and LeVar Arrington. And since he's arrived on campus, Nick Singleton has gotten a lot of Barkley-esque treatment from people within the program. So yeah, there's a ton of reason for optimism, but I understand that people aren't optimistic. It's year 4, Sean Clifford. Outside of those first 5 games last year, Sean Clifford is what he is. You know, we've heard it for so many years now. This is finally the year at the running game. I understand, or with the offensive line, excuse me. I understand the people who aren't confident in the offensive line. And with that offensive line, while I think it's very talented, you're probably looking at a redshirt sophomore left tackle, redshirt freshman left guard. That's always problematic potentially. And with the running game, again, last year we heard from the coaching staff about how great this running back room is going to be. It did not work out. What will we get this year? Now, I will say I think Singleton is the type of back that, again, like Barkley, like a Miles Sanders, like a Journey Brown, you don't have to have a great offensive line because he's got the burst. He's got that elite athleticism that you give him any little hole and he's gone, which no knock on Kevon Lee. Kevon Lee is not that back, but I think Singleton and Lee could be a good complement to each other because I do believe Lee last year tried too much to be that home run threat that he is not. And that led him away from being what makes Lee great, which is, you know, think 2019 Noah Cain. I'm going to get 3 yards, barrel over a linebacker, fall forward for next yard and a half, go back to the huddle and do it again. So this is one of those occasions where I can definitely see both sides here. I understand the optimism of James Franklin. I understand the concern and maybe pessimism of some fans, but ultimately as long as Sean Clifford is healthy, as long as the offensive line is at least average, I have a hard time seeing this offense not, you know, I'm not saying they're going to be the best offense in the Big Ten or anything, but I have a hard time seeing the offense not take a step forward this year.
I'd be inclined to agree with you as well. I do think the offense takes a step forward. A couple of things. I guess going back to Mitchell Tinsley. First of all, it's Western Kentucky. I think he said Western Michigan a couple times. But it's easy to get your directional schools mixed up. So
if I did, I apologize to any Western Kentucky fans maybe out there listening. The
yeah,
Hilltop
apologies for talking but going on with Mitchell Tinsley, he intrigues me in the sense that, he tore it up, 14 touchdowns, had like nearly 1,500 yards receiving at Western Kentucky last year. Now, obviously, competition level, not what is going to be the Big Ten, but he does have a couple games against Big Ten foes last year, Michigan State and Indiana, and he put up some pretty strong numbers. And I'm actually pulled them up real quick because they were pretty solid numbers here. So I think he had Yes, against Indiana, we have 4 catches, 68 yards. It was a 2-point loss. Against Michigan State, got beat by 17, but they put up 31 points, thanks in part to Tinsley catching 7 balls for 127 yards. So he's shown he can be productive against Big Ten defenses. And like I said, the focus is going to be on Parker Washington, so that could really open things up for Mitchell Tinsley. And of course, after a few games, I think future opponents on the schedule will get the message and start to, focus on trying to stop him too. But then, of course, that leaves Washington or Lambert Smith more free. So it really could be more of a pick your poison. And I think furthermore, this can help with future portal recruiting for Penn State at the receiver position. If Tinsley tears it up, I think of it could be a similar effect to what Kenneth Walker had for Michigan State and grabbing solid transfer guys from running back. You could see a transfer pipeline at receiver to Penn State if Tinsley has a huge year. And yeah,
one thing real quick, I'll add to that. Just look at Arnold Ebiketie and Chop Robinson this year as a just example right here in Penn State, how a transfer position, a player having success at a position as a transfer can lead to further success in the portal at that position.
An excellent point, and we will get more into that when we talk about the defense shortly. But yeah, I think we just like a defensive end, receiver could start to become a yearly portal pipeline if Tinsley tears it up like I'm hopeful he can this year. And then, of course, running backs. We talked about Singleton. And I'm really curious to see, you want to obviously you want to have one guy getting the ball carries ideally, but in this day and age of football, you do want to have a couple people to throw in there to give the starter a reaver, but also in certain situations, like I said, you just need to pick up a few yards, move the sticks, barrel over a linebacker or two. And, Kevon Lee could be that guy. Maybe it's Katron Allen. We'll see. But I'm looking for that, like we said, thunder and lightning, who can be the thunder to Nick Singleton's lightning. That's what I'm curious to see. And, of course, the O-line, I've said it before on here. I think they take a step forward this year. I like what they have returning. I think adding Hunter Norzad out of the portal, bringing him on to the O-line, I think it's going to help immensely. And again, I think when we talked before, you mentioned before of Sean Clifford being in. He's not learning a new offense. He's mastering it now. And the same can be said for the rest of the offensive players. I mean, of course, the quarterback has to know all the terminology, but so do the the offensive linemen have to know what blocking scheme is involved with each play. Receivers need to know what routes they're running. Running backs need to know, are they staying in as a blocker? Do they go out as a receiver? Are they going to be carrying the ball? What's going to happen? So they all got to be on the same page. And of course, they all work with the same coordinator. So to have that same coordinator back 2 years in a row, I would hope there's more consistency. Everyone's on the same page this time around. So, I'm feeling optimistic. Now, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if it's going to be the best offense in the Big Ten. I think it's going to be Ohio State. And I think, Michigan could be right up there too with what they have returning. But I think it's going to be formidable enough that, teams are going to have to score a lot to beat Penn State this year. Like, you're hopefully not going to see, like Illinois type games from last year or anything of that matter. Moving on to the defensive side of the ball, as you alluded to earlier, Marty, Franklin did have high praise for the D-line. PJ Mustipher, especially coming back to lead that group after he went down against Iowa last year. And that's actually another injury. That's an injury that doesn't get talked about. But we all talk about Cliff going down to Iowa, but I'd say, PJ Mustipher going down probably hurt the defense pretty badly too, similar to Cliff being hurt, the defense just wasn't quite the same, especially on that D line. So, what does it mean to have a guy like PJ Mustipher back in the fold?
Mustipher is huge for Penn State. Not just what he gives you in terms of a player, but even as a leader on that field. He was a team captain last year for a reason. He's going to be a team captain in this year. And one thing with Mustipher, and I put a lot of stock into this for players in any sport, that good bloodline, those good genes. His brother's been the starting center for the Chicago Bears for 2 or 3 years now, I think it is. And he's learned a lot from his brother about the leadership, especially in the trenches. And those kinds of things are important. You mentioned not having him against Illinois. Illinois ran for 350 yards or whatever it was. Feel very confident PJ Mustipher's in the middle there, anchoring that defensive line. The Illini don't do that. I mean, shoot, even if Clifford gets hurt, if Mustipher is able to play the rest of that game against Iowa, there's a good chance Penn State's defense, which just gave an absolute Herculean effort in that game, does not get worn down at the very end for that late drive. Iowa had to take the lead. So you mentioned that people overlooked that injury. It was a big one. Getting Mustipher back is big in so many ways. I know the defense lost a decent amount. Yes, they lost Brent Pry, who is a tremendous defense coordinator. But you bring in Manny Diaz, who's no slouch himself. There's still a lot of talent there to work with. And I think, there's definitely a lot of reasons for fans to still be optimistic about this defense going into the season.
Certainly. And he also, Franklin also was a D-line. He hyped up getting Adisa Isaac back as being a huge thing. He did acknowledge, obviously losing Arnold McKatie's tough. And, they've turned through a lot of guys over the, Yetur Gross-Matos, Dafe Owe, and now Ebiketie all in the NFL. So getting Isaac back. And then he was especially praising Chop Robinson, the transfer from Maryland, who he says he'll be a highly productive, low maintenance kind of guy, which, which is probably the best praise you can give a player. And I guess, frankly, I didn't think too much of it when he transferred him, but the more that I see Chop Robinson get talked about, the more excited I am to see how productive he is this year. And then, of course, Denai Dennis Sutton, who's been there since second summer session. He didn't come. He wasn't an early enrollee, but he's a guy I would expect to be a part of the rotation at least. And who knows? Maybe even there's himself a start by the end of the year.
Yeah, even with the loss of Arnold Ebiketie, I still think this pass rush can be very good. You mentioned Adisa Isaac. Getting him back from that torn Achilles is just massive. And, you're going to expect a little bit of rust early in the season, but he was a guy who I think last year Penn State really expected to take a big step forward for that defense. Chop Robinson was a midseason freshman All-American for a reason at Maryland last year. He was a 5-star prospect in high school for a reason. I think he's a guy who could really contribute in the pass rush. And you mentioned Denai Dennis Sutton. He was a guy that Penn State had to fight their tails off to beat Georgia for a reason. And, whenever Georgia or Alabama, who both were after Sutton hard or after a guy hard for a reason, there's a reason, So getting him in is big. I think that this pass rush is one position that, in my opinion, is going to look a lot better come October than September, simply because you look at Adisa Isaac, he's got the rust to knock off. Denai Dennis Sutton, true freshman. Chop Robinson, still a true sophomore. There's a lot of growth there. And I think one underrated aspect of the pass rush to watch, I think that the kind of aggressive defense Manny Diaz runs, I could see that working really well with a guy like Curtis Jacobs, who's just an athletic freak at linebacker that could come off the edges in pass rushing situations. So I don't think getting to the quarterback is going to be an issue for Penn State this year defensively. And like I said, I think the pass rush is an area that as the season goes on has the ability to improve.
Indeed, it's going to be a very interesting group to watch for sure. For the rest of the defense, Franklin, I think much like I was saying, linebacker, I'm pretty sure the linebacker is a question mark. He does like the two outside linebacker slot, as you mentioned now, Curtis Jacobs you can Sharpie him as one of the starter, and Jonathan Sutherland will presumably be the other. But when he mentioned the Mike linebacker, that's a term for middle linebacker at Penn State. The Mike linebacker is something that's going to go. That competition is going to go deep into camp. So, it's reading between the lines. That's coach speak for. We're still figuring it out, folks. But as we know, as we all figured though, linebacker depth was going to be an issue going into this year, and why we've said on previous shows this year that don't be surprised if Manny Diaz opts to go with some 4-2-5 looks to mask those depth issues at linebacker. As for the secondary, I'm sure he expects big things, but he didn't strike this as optimistic of a tone as maybe you and I would strike with the secondary. But he was praising Joey Porter Jr. and Jair Brown, especially because Brown was one of the three players to make trip with Penn State, with Mustafa and Cliff being the other two. But Marty, when you look at that back seven, what do you like? What don't you like? What are you excited about?
I really like the back seven. There's a lot there to like, especially that back four. Now you get into the linebacker, there's definitely concerns there. Depth being the biggest one. But I think if they stay healthy at linebacker, it's a big if, obviously. I think if they stay healthy, they'll be okay. We already mentioned Curtis Jacobs. I think it might between Kobe King and Tyler Elsdon, they'll figure something out. And you said how Manny Diaz will run a lot of 4-2-5. I think they will, which will help offset the issues at the Sam linebacker position. Now, that secondary, I think, can be a very good one. Joey Porter Jr. and Kalen King are your cornerbacks. That could prove to be one of the best cornerback duos in the Big Ten. You look at safety, Tig Brown might be the best safety in the Big Ten. Easily could have gone pro last year. And if you can figure out that second safety position beside him, which Keaton Ellis, lots of talent, has played a lot of football for Penn State. Zakee Wheatley, who has just done nothing but shot up this depth chart and impressed the coaches since he got to campus last summer. Jalen Reed, who's done the same thing as Wheatley. There's a lot of talent there. When you have that much talent, odds are you're going to figure it out. And maybe the most underrated player on this entire team, Daquan Hardy, their nickelback, just extremely underrated in what he brings to this defense, both in coverage, run support, the ability to blitz. So that back seven, I think the back four of that is going to be very good. And with Manny Diaz and a lot of instances, it's going to be the back five. But linebacker might be the biggest question mark on this entire team, honestly. There's not a lot of depth there. They are 1 or 2 injuries away from complete disaster at linebacker. And as long as that doesn't happen, I think they'll be okay there. But if they get 1 or 2 injuries, get a guy who's underperforming, all of a sudden linebacker could become a major problem for Penn State, especially against a team like Michigan, who's going to look to run the ball a lot, or maybe a team like Ohio State, who's going to look to run a lot of crossing routes with, the guys that like Jackson Smith and Jigba of the world and just pick you apart. So I think that the talent is there. And I'm not worried about in the secondary, but a linebacker, they've got to stay healthy. They just absolutely have to stay healthy. And if they don't, things can get real hairy there real fast.
Indeed, I'd say the linebacker is what scares me the most. Similar to quarterback last year, your starters are probably good. Your starters are pretty good, but if 1 or 2 of them go down, oh boy, things really get interesting then. But that's why, again, I go back to saying I think you're going to see. I would think Manny Diaz will try to find some creative ways to mask that lack of depth. At least I'd hope he would, especially when you've got a deep secondary led by Jair Brown, Joey Porter Jr. That group. It's certainly going to be interesting to see how they fare going forward. So, fingers crossed. Wasn't really much talk about special teams. So, I don't know if you got anything to say about special teams, Marty.
The only thing I'll say about special teams, I think we see a big youth movement this year. Alex Bichetta, for, long-lasting Penn State fans out there, same high school as Blake Gillikin. I assume Bichetta, the true freshman, will punt. And the kicker, I think Sanders Haydak, who's a redshirt freshman Bethlehem, PA, who he's one of those guys. The ball just sounds different coming off his foot. I'm assuming we see Haydak doing kickoffs and potentially field goals by the end of the year, but I think by the end of the season, you at least have your kicker and your partner of the future. And people may laugh at that, but anyone who watched Penn State during the sanction years will tell you, do not underestimate the need of having a quality kicker and punter. Because there are a lot of games Penn State lost from 2012 to 2014 that with quality kicking and punting, they would have won.
I can think of two off the top of my head. The Maryland and Illinois games in 2014. If Penn State had a Blake Gillikin or Jordan Stout or Alex Bichetta back there punting to flip the field, it could have ended up with different results.
Don't forget Virginia in 2012, the kicker. I mean, it was Sam Fickens different as he went on to become one of the best kickers in school history, but the poor kid was not ready. And what was it? 3 or 4 missed extra points against Virginia and a 1-point loss. It's just, man, it's just glad those days are behind us.
Yeah, try being at that game like I was.
I'm sorry. I was driving to Pittsburgh listening to it on the radio. So at least when I got frustrated, I was able to just turn the radio off and ignore it.
Yeah, it was some, and like I said, thankfully, those days.
Meta Portal with
Smart
Smart.
behind us. Sorry about that. So as we covered, like Franklin has said, as we also mentioned, Cliff, PJ Musfer, Jair Brown were the players who represented Penn State at Big Ten Media Days, and they certainly had things to say. I think with PJ especially, I couldn't stop thinking about the dinner that he had eaten the night before to celebrate having passed his last ever conditioning test with the team. So, off the top of my head, it was a steak, 2 lobster tails, mashed potatoes, and shrimp. So keep in mind, this is like a 300-pound guy we're talking about doing this, but I'm training for a marathon, and there's definitely I got a huge appetite after, maybe like a 20-mile run, but man, I still don't think I'd be able to put all that food down myself.
Yeah, that's impressive. I weigh 230 pounds. I'm not a small guy, but by no means could I handle something like that. And, kudos to PJ Mustafa for not just be able to eat that, but eat that and then still look like a very scary physical specimen that if you saw in a dark alley at night, you would turn around and run because PJ's a big dude. And yeah, that's just one thing that always blow my mind. And, I think a lot of testament's got to go to these nutrition programs and strength conditioning programs where you have these guys who, weigh 330 pounds and look like they're like 200 pounds of solid muscle. So yeah, I don't blame them. Whenever I was in high school, I remember whenever camp would end in the fall going into the season, the seniors would always go out to the local Chinese buffet to celebrate being done with conditioning and be done with camp for their career. So I can understand where he was coming from.
Oh yeah, I certainly can. And then you had Sean Clifford mentioning he didn't want to talk at all about this new College Football Players Association chapter that was founded at Penn State, which essentially you can look at it like a union. And interestingly enough, it kind of seems to fall in the footsteps, not only with the NIL that was allowed last year, but just where you're seeing around the country with Starbucks stores unionizing, and now it's coming over to college football. And obviously he didn't want to talk about it, but you and I can maybe touch on it a little bit. I'm not a labor relations expert, so I can't tell you how this is gonna pan out. But I would have to think if now the NIL floodgates are open, this is probably gonna have a bigger chance of success maybe than when the Northwestern players attempted to unionize about a decade ago.
Yeah, definitely. Because now that these kids are getting paid, they really can justify this more. I tried to pick my dad's brain a little bit about it because he works for Steel Mill and he's the vice president of the union out there. So he understands the stuff pretty good. And that was one thing he said, Tim, also was now with NIL in place, it gives them a lot more footing to stand on as quote unquote employees of the schools. Yes, in the past they could say that, but they weren't getting paid and they couldn't be paid legally outside of their stipend. So it's a little bit different. But now with NIL, they have the ability to use themselves to make the money. That gives them a lot more footing to stand on. And, I think this can be a positive thing for college football too, because you have these kids who are out there who, 18, 19, 20 years old, who might go out and suffer injuries that just derail their football careers and, completely change the course of their lives. So just having better insurance, having, being better taken care of in case something like that happens is good. And, I know people like to still talk about the student athlete and that sort of thing, but ultimately these universities, college football is a $1 billion industry, and any university that has a successful college football program, as university has got more money coming in, has more students, in turns making more money. It's the moneymaker for any major university in this country. So these players who are going out there making that money deserve to be better taken care of.
Indeed. I mean, these programs, these schools, they're making tens of millions. Well, when you add in the Big Ten media deal, probably hundreds of millions of dollars off, especially off, the success and the hard work that these players put in, coaches and players put in. Now the coaches are getting nicely compensated with pay. But the players, for the longest time, they weren't really getting anything. Yeah, they got a stipend eventually, but it's only now in the past year with this NIL, at least they can, the very least now they can start, getting sponsored by, local companies, local establishment, or even some guy's startup, wants to sponsor a player. But they can do that. They can do a promo for, I still think back. There was the tight end at Kansas who caught the game-winning 2-point conversion at Texas. I forget his name, but like immediately after that, the following week, they did a local Applebee's commercial with him and like a 2-for-1 deal. And it's the cheapest thing, but he just ends it by, I always like going for two. So yeah, so you can now do stuff like that, which, frankly, it should have been allowed decades ago, if you ask me. So yeah, I'll definitely be keeping an eye on that. And as far as the other things Sean Clifford touched on, I think we mentioned it already, but he mentioned how the fact that he's mastering an offense this year as opposed to learning a new one, and he seemed like he couldn't emphasize that enough. So as I said, if we said it before on previous shows, if he's healthy. When he's healthy, we saw what he did last year in Yurcic's offense, and that was when he was just learning it. Now that he's mastered it, he's 100%. Hopefully we can see him go back to what he was pre-Iowa injury. And then Jair Brown, it was really, I was watching the Big Ten Network's interview with him, with the three players, and like Mustafa and Cliff couldn't keep enough praise on Brown, and just, his journey from, being at Lackawanna Community College and then coming to Penn State and just working his tail off. And now here he is. He's like the de facto leader of the defense, kind of like what Jaquan Brisker was last year. Now he's, he seems to be in charge of that back seven.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Jaquan Brisker, because I was thinking that myself. I understand in a lot of ways it's a little bit of a lazy comparison to compare Tig Brown to Jaquan Brisker, but it's very accurate. They both came to Lackawanna. Both were kids that didn't have a lot of, for totally different reasons, but didn't have a lot of opportunities coming out of high school. And both were kids who have gone to Penn State, and in Brisker's situation became an All-American who was almost a first-round pick, but still, I think, either the second or third safety off the board in this past NFL draft. And Tig's a guy who is going to get a lot of preseason All Big Ten, All-American consideration, and probably be one of the first safeties off the board next April. So I really like that comparison. I mean, they're very similar players. I think they both are not afraid to assist in the run. They both are ball hawking safeties, which is something Penn State has not had in a long time. It was really nice to see in Brisker the last few years, and really nice to see in Brown again this year. Yeah, I think Brown is one of the most underrated players in college football defensively. And I think he's a guy who Similar to Brisker last year, a lot of fans outside of Penn State, outside of the Big Ten, may not know him right now, but by the end of the year, I think a lot of people are going to know who he is.
I would be inclined to agree. Yes, fellas, I know there's an audience, and we are going to get to your questions soon enough. One more thing to touch on before we go to our viewer questions. Patrick Kraft, the new athletic director for Penn State, was also at Big Ten Media Days, and man, did he go off on the scheduling? Him and Franklin really, they went off on. But Kraft, can I kind of liken him to remember that Key and Peele sketch where Key plays Obama's anger translator? Like that's kind of what Patrick Kraft. He's like Franklin's anger translator. Like he basically he mentioned like he called up the Big Ten offices and with regards to how this is Franklin's 9th season, and only once has Penn State opened Big Ten play at home, and that was 2015 against Rutgers. And all the other games in Big Ten play they've started have been on the road, including, of course, this year. So, Kraft talked about how that's just not right, needs to be fixed. He did also harp on, ironic with facilities. Of course, there's constantly been talk about maybe Beer Stadium could use some renovations, but his emphasis seems to be on the Olympic facilities. He mentions men's and women's soccer being top priority, but he's definitely a big focus on the Olympic sport facilities, getting those up to par. He seems to be pretty pleased with how things are progressing in the football facilities front. So now he's focused on those. But the scheduling was definitely something that stuck out. But I got to say, Marty, it's nice to have an athletic director who's out there vocally fighting for Penn State. Now, that's not to say that maybe Sandy Barber didn't do anything like behind the scenes, but to have a guy who's coming out there saying, yeah, this is wrong. Penn State should not be constantly opening up on the road every single year, amongst other things. It's nice to see someone standing up for Penn State.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the scheduling thing has always been extremely frustrating to me, made worse by the fact Penn State's at worst, the third best program in the conference behind Ohio State and Michigan. And, even though a lot of people probably tell you Michigan's a better program than Penn State, go look what they've done historically, especially the last 20, 25 years. Penn State's a better program than Michigan. And you're talking about a true blue blood who just does not get treated that way. It's not just the conference openers. 2017 and 2018, you play Ohio State and Michigan State back-to-back weeks. And that includes 2017 when you played Michigan the week before Ohio State. This year, you have a 3-game stretch of at Michigan and then home against Minnesota and Ohio State. Penn State just continually seems to get screwed over with the scheduling. And it's great to see Pat Kraft speak out against it and lash against it. I think Kraft is going to be just a tremendous hire as athletic director. He's a guy who seems all in on realizing that football is what it's the moneymaker. It's the bell cow for Penn State. And at the same time, he's not getting ignore the other sports. I know, Tim, you and I have talked about this between texting our group chat for Black Shoe Diaries. Seems like Kraft is really ready to try and do what he needs to help revitalize the basketball program a lot, also and pump more money into that. Today he was going to bat for the Olympic sports. It just seems like Penn State hit an absolute home run of a hire in Pat Kraft. And I think today was his first chance to really kind of showcase that to everybody. And he seemed to really do an excellent job of doing that.
Indeed. And it's hard to believe he's only actually been in the job he'll be coming up on 1 month. He started on July 1st. So actually, it hasn't even quite been a month yet, but already I'm liking what I see. And I'm hopeful going forward, we'll see some big things, as far as, getting what needs to be done to get the football program over the hump, and just also the other sport. Yeah, like I mentioned, the Olympic sports. And, as a longtime Penn State basketball fan, I'm pretty excited to see, what he does to put even more resources into the hoops program, which, credit to the previous administration. They were starting to do that with the hiring of Micah Shrewsbury. But, of course, we're going to keep it to football in this show. So we'll do another show on basketball if you want. But anyway, thanks for being patient, fellow viewers. We're going to get to some of your questions now that you've been putting here in the chat. And we'll start here with Gary asks, doesn't the 22, that means 22 recruiting class, have a new stud receiver? I believe you're talking about Caden Saunders, blue chip receiver out of Ohio. Yeah, Franklin has mentioned him specifically as a guy who he thinks can contribute immediately. Now, obviously I don't expect he's not going to be a starter receiver, but I could see him perhaps maybe getting some backup reps in the slot spots. Or I especially could see him perhaps breaking through on special teams, maybe as a kick returner or punt returner. He is a pretty speedy guy, from my understanding. Marty, got anything to add on to that?
Yeah, Saunders was a guy who was always compared to KJ Hamler in high school. Very similar builds. Now, Saunders is a little bit bigger at about 5'11", 180, 185 pounds. It's a little bit bigger than KJ was coming out. A lot of similar speed and skill set as a game. Now, if you remember back, KJ Hamler did not play as a true freshman, largely because he was coming off an ACL tear. So I think Saunders is a kid, like you said, we'll see him make an impact this year. He's not going to start. There will probably be at least one or two plays where he catches the ball coming across the middle and just runs past the defense and wows people. So I do think Saunders, doesn't redshirt this year and will make an impact, but we don't really get to see what Caden Saunders can do until next season, because I do think he's a guy who will probably need a year in the strength and conditioning program to add a little bit of mass, add a little bit of strength, add a little bit of muscle to make sure he's not coming across the middle and just getting destroyed by some safety. But definitely a kid with just unlimited potential wide receiver.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what he brings to the table this year. And of course, especially, the couple years going forward, once he's got, another full year into the strength conditioning program. Remick coming right out of the gates. So Penn State be in the running for the Big Ten, or will they disappoint again? Marty, you want to take this one?
I personally think, I guess it depends on what your definition of disappointing is, definition of being in the running is. I right now would probably peg Penn State at 9-3. That said, if they would beat everybody but Ohio State, it certainly wouldn't surprise me either. I think Penn State is the second most talented team in the conference. Now, that doesn't always mean you're going to be the second best team, because a lot of this talent are young guys who either may not play this year or are going to be redshirt or true freshmen who are going to make their freshman mistakes, But I can't see this team. I think they go 9-3. I won't be surprised to see 10-2 or 11-1. I think it's a big bounce back season for them. And again, if they make it to Indy, I'm not going to be surprised. At the same time, if they go 8-4, I'm not going to be surprised. But I think they fall somewhere in the middle, 9-3, 10-2, good bounce back season, get a Citrus Bowl berth, maybe a New Year's Six Bowl. And, you look ahead to next year. I think that's when things really could start to open up for this team in a window of contention within the Big Ten and the college football playoff. But yeah, I think they're definitely better than they were last year. And just got to stay healthy. Health is a big thing. And I think one thing that also really works in favor this year, if Sean Clifford does get hurt, the situation behind him is just night and day compared to last year. We see Christian Veilleux, what he did down the stretch last year. You have Drew Allar, who was the almost number one player in the country last year, number one quarterback. Bo Pribula, maybe the most prolific passer in the history of Pennsylvania high school football. So there's a lot of talent behind him now too, where you can absorb that a lot better.
Yeah, my answer would just be one big shrug emoji right now. I think I'm more intrigued and curious than anything else. Just a lot of, it feels like a transition-y type year. Like you lost some key guys from last year, but then you also bring in some promising newcomers, recruits, and also high school recruits, and also guys from the transfer portal. So we'll see. Like I said, 9-3. I could definitely see that. I think I'm gonna have a more firm prediction next month. Obviously, on Black Sheep Diaries, we do a yearly prediction roundtable. So I'm still thinking right now what I'm going to predict for that. But if they did go 10-2 or even 11-1, would I be? I guess I wouldn't be surprised. If I would mean that everything click together. Unlike kind of the opposite of last year, where just everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. If the opposite happens this year, then yeah, maybe 10-11-1 and surprise trip to Indy. We'll see. I'm not only going to go that far, but I am hopeful. Gun to my head, this will be more satisfied with the final results of this season than we were at the end of last year. Michael asks, how nervous are you both with Penn State playing Purdue to start the season? I'll start it off, Michael. I've said this a few times before on the show. I'm not as nervous as I was as last year when they had to open at Wisconsin. To me, that was more daunting. But we'll say this is a Thursday night game, nationally televised. I'm sure Purdue is going to, that student section will be rocking. They're doing a blackout. I'd expect, it'll definitely be an electric atmosphere for sure. And, I'm sure, and, the team seems to be pretty pumped. And they do bring I'll say they bring back some key guys. I mean, most importantly, Aiden O'Connell, their, at quarterback, similar to Cliff, back for his 6th year. So now, of course, how that pass tag fare without David Bell in the picture. I know they picked up the Iowa transfer, Charlie Jones. I believe that's his name, Charlie Jones. So we'll see how he factors in there. Certainly, I would expect, Purdue to get their share of pass yards. I think what that game will hinge upon is, can Purdue get a run game going? Can Penn, if they can, then it could be a good night for the Boilers. But I guess right now I see that line's currently at 3.5 for Penn in favor of Penn State, and that sounds about right to me. I haven't made a prediction in the game, but I would be inclined to pick Penn State if I had to predict right now. I just, I think the offense is. I think the offense will be capable of putting up enough points where the defense just needs to. I think it'll be. You could see like Purdue picking up a bunch, probably like 400 yards passing, but it's kind of like a bend but don't break kind of thing for Penn State. They'll move it well between the 20s, but when it gets down to the red zone, Penn State clamps down and holds them to field goals, maybe get a turnover. I'm curious to see the whole what I think is a strength on strength Purdue's passing attack and against Penn State's secondary. Marty.
Yeah, you mentioned the strength on strength. That would be a lot of fun to watch because Aiden O'Connell might be the most underrated quarterback in the Big Ten, going against a really good receiver crew. And that Charlie Jones pickup was big for Purdue because they had lost a lot of wide receiver coming out of last season. So I think that's one that without that pickup, I would feel even more confident picking Penn State. I'm with you right now. If I had to make a pick, I'd pick the Nittany Lions, but it won't be easy. And I will say, Thursday night, opening night, national TV, Purdue's doing a blackout. Absolutely, under no circumstance can you let Purdue jump out to like a 10-0, 14-0 lead. Because if that happens, buckle up. You could be in for a very long night. I agree with you. I'm more confident than I was the Wisconsin game last year. Last year, I picked Wisconsin to win that game. Like I said, right now, I'd pick the Nittany Lions. But the difference is Wisconsin didn't have the type of offense where you were worried about falling in a hole and having to come back while they kept scoring, which thankfully that wasn't the case because it took Penn State's offense about 3.5 quarters to get in gear in that game. But yeah, it should be fun. I'm looking forward to it. It'll be kind of nice, that first Saturday of college football to be able to just kick my feet up, relax, and watch games. I worry about Penn State. But yeah, I'm definitely nervous. And part of it is because Jeff Brom's a good coach, and Purdue's just one of those teams. We saw them do it to Ohio State a couple years ago. You can never underestimate this Purdue team. So hopefully Penn State just comes out, weather the storm early because there's going to be a storm, and you'll be okay if you do that. But yeah, it'll be a fun game to start the year. I think this could be it's a really good matchup between two legitimate top 25 type of teams.
Indeed. First of all, thank you, Falcon Falcon ERX for the $2 super sticker. Also got another paid commenter here. Thank you for the $5, John. Pick guy who's intrigued. What do you think Franklin needs to do for the extension to be considered a success? Marty?
I mean, honestly, I think if James Franklin can continue to consistently do what Penn State did in 2016 through 2019, it's a success. 2016, win the Big Ten, go to the Rose Bowl, you're 11-3. 2017, 11-2, win the Fiesta Bowl. 2018, the down year, you're 9-4 and win the Citrus Bowl. And if Trace McSorley doesn't get hurt, you probably win 10 games that season. 2019, 11-2 and win the Cotton Bowl. If you're consistently winning 9 to 10 games and finishing the top 10 to 15 in the country the way Penn State did, I mean, actually, I think in 2019 or 2018, excuse me, the down year of that quartet, they finished 12th in the final regular season college football playoff ranking. So they were a top 12 team for 4 straight years and won 11 games in 3 of those 4 with a Big Ten title and 2 New Year's Six bowl wins. If he does that, he justifies his contract to more, especially with the expanded playoff. I would argue there might not be a team in the country the expanded playoff helps more than Penn State. If we had a 12-team playoff from the get-go, Penn State already has 4 playoff berths under their belt, and who knows what happens if that, they always say in any sport in the playoffs, just get in, you give yourself a chance. So I think if James Franklin can get this program back to where they were in those years, which I think he's capable of, 2020 threw out the window for a million reasons. Last year, if Clifford doesn't get hurt, probably another double-digit win season. So as long as James Franklin can just continue to do what he did for that 4-year stretch in 2016 to 2019, in my opinion, he justifies that contract, especially in today's college football.
Yeah, I would say if they get back to where they were right before COVID hit, where they had 3 11-win seasons over a 4-year span, which that's the most successful stretch since 1993 through 96, to give you perspective. So it was a string of success that hadn't been seen in literally a generation. So it gets back to that, and maybe then some. Like Marty said, I mean, it's not a matter of if, but when and how many teams is the playoff going to expand to? I think especially once they expand, that good likelihood that Penn State, especially the way they've recruited, I think they can finally break through and get that long coveted playoff bid. So I think that, of course, does the university follow through on its promises to give, Franklin what he asked for, facilities? It seems like they're on their way with the facilities. Just the other, whatever little off-field things are necessary, which I know there's a huge debate over this last year. Like, people were jokingly being like, oh, they just had a lazy river. Maybe Sean Clifford wouldn't have, missed that receiver, But the point of those things are, you have the best facilities, the best nutrition bar, whatever, lazy river if you need it, what have you, because that's what the recruits eat up. That's why you see, those SEC programs, like Bama, Georgia, and any other school like Clemson. That's why you see them, rack it up with blue chip recruits. And it's also why some recruits might go several times to Penn State, but they take one trip down to Georgia, and suddenly, Georgia's right in the thick of things, if not leading for the recruit. So that's why you do all those things. So look at that. I'm hopeful with Pat Kraft on board now that he's going to, stay on top of that, make sure it's moving along as planned. So I think with the on-field part, I'm hopeful now. Now they've had I think another thing we haven't talked much about, Marty. This is the first time in 3 years Penn State's had a normal off-season, normal winter conditioning, normal spring practice and spring game, normal summer practices, and then starting, I guess not next, but within the next couple of weeks of the normal fall camp. So everything normal in 2022. That, again, first time since COVID hit. So I don't think we should sleep on the fact that, Franklin is a creature of habit. To have, this, what looks, the old routine back, I'm sure is gonna, help immensely.
Yeah, simple as it may sound, normal can go a long ways in life. And like you said, James Franklin, absolute creature of habit. That definitely applies to him. Sorry, I got to plug my laptop is running out of juice.
Oh,
I got to plug it in. But yeah, no, getting that back, I think is going to be huge for Penn State. It's going to be huge for a lot of programs. So yeah, it's again, I expect them to be better than last year. They have too much talent to go 7-6 again. In last year's team, if not for injuries, you know, probably is a totally different season. But yeah, I'm just excited to have football season back. And like you said, the first like completely normal season really since 2019. So it'll be fun for college football in general on that front.
indeed. We had a question about. I'm trying to pull it up. Here we go. Question on Manny Diaz. As confident in Diaz, I've heard mixed opinions on him. I know we've talked about it a little bit in past shows. I guess I'm feeling pretty good about him overall. Um, again, I think Brent Pry was a solid coordinator. It's a great hire for Virginia Tech, if you ask me. And I think there's an opportunity maybe for Manny to, put his own little twist on the defense. I know I talked about this with Marty before. Just hopefully, maybe a little more aggressive, or at least have more effective blitzing, pass rushing. It just seemed there were too many times under like, we would just be like a split second too late getting to the quarterback, as they were rushing them.
Yeah, I agree with that. I go back and it's probably easy for Penn State fans to go back to this game. I go back to 2017 in Columbus. That just epic meltdown in the last 12 minutes. How many times the Penn State blitzer would be half a step away from burying JT Barrett as Barrett would just throw a dart as the Buckeyes rallied in that game. And that just seemed to always be a problem for Pry. And I don't want to mean, like, I'm with you. I don't want this to sound like a knock on Pry. I think Pry is a tremendous coach. I think it's a great hire for Virginia Tech. I think he'll do a lot of great things for the Hokies. But for Manny Diaz, I like the hire a lot. And I know we've talked about this in the Black Sheet Irish chat thread. Had you told me 3 or 4 years ago Penn State's coordinators are going to be Mike Yursich and Manny Diaz, I would have told you you're freaking insane, man. But just you're going to be tough to find a better coordinator duo in all of college football that have accomplished as much as these guys have. And I do think at Miami, a lot of the problems for Manny Diaz were as much culture problems as they were anything else, and not culture problems that were his doing. I also think he got a short stick there. I didn't think Miami should have fired him when they did, but I do think build off that also, Diaz won't take a step back and just run his defense instead of run a whole program will benefit him greatly. And yeah, I think this will be a tremendous hire for the Lions. I know when he was hired, some people were worried, in 2 years he's going to be a head coach, but if look at Alabama, if your coordinators or your coaches are leaving every 2 to 3 years to become head coaches, or your position coaches are leaving to become coordinators, you're doing something right. And that's one thing James Franklin has always done a good job of. If you look at his coaching tree at Penn State, I mean, Charles Huff, Josh Gaddish, Joe Moorhead, there's some really impressive names on the Brent Pry. There's some really impressive names on that list. James has flubbed very few assistant coaching hirings, and I don't expect Diaz to be one of those. I think Manny Diaz will be a tremendous addition to this coaching staff and is going to very quickly become, if he's not already, one of the top defense coordinators in the Big Ten. Maybe right there with Jim Knowles in Columbus as the best defense coordinator in the Big Ten.
Yeah, time will tell indeed. Got time for a couple more questions. It's just me, Tim, 79. Any opinion on the decision to have the whiteout versus Minnesota rather than Ohio State? And I got a hot take. Well, I guess it's not a hot take, but I got a take on this. Personally, I like it. I'm glad they picked a night game for the whiteouts. There was a part of me that was worried they were gonna be so stubborn to keep it on Ohio State, even though that's almost assuredly going to get the big noon kick treatment on Fox. So I'm glad they picked Minnesota. And Minnesota, they're a team that's expected to be pretty good this year. Could be a dark horse contender in the West, and they look at their openings. Look at their first several games before they play Penn State. Pretty good chance they're coming into Happy Valley with only one loss and ranked. And there's a lot of some good storylines there. Obviously, first time for Minnesota playing under the whiteout. How do they handle that? I know the players, PJ Fleck and them, were saying at media days how excited they were because some of those players grew up watching that on TV, the whiteout games, and now they get to actually partake in it. Of course, as a visiting team, but you wonder though, how are they can talk about how excited they're all they want, but when you're actually there and you have to get the play call in and you got 110,000 screaming fans wearing white, throwing white shaking white pom-poms at you, it's a little different. So, Ohio State and Michigan are a little more used to dealing with those environments, but Minnesota, we'll see. And then of course there's the whole Kirk Shiraka revenge factor, perhaps, as the former Penn State coordinator, who was previously Minnesota's coordinator and is now once again Minnesota's coordinator, will be making his return to Happy Valley for the first time since he was replaced by Mike Yurcich. So, that'll be another tricky storyline right there. I'm excited for it. I'm hoping to make it up to State College for that game. COVID permitting, as in I don't come down with it right before the game and have to miss out on it. So, but yeah, I like it personally. Marty, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. The whiteout should always be at night. There's only been 2 daytime whiteouts against Michigan in 2015 and 2011 against Alabama, and I was at the Alabama game, and just it's not the same. It's not the same. Should always be at night. And I also think Penn State, in a way, this is a bit of a middle finger to Fox for taking that Ohio State game, putting it at noon instead of in prime time. Because Fox would love to be able to promote big noon kickoff, white out, and they can't now. But yeah, I also think it's interesting with this. Had you told me in January of 2021 or January of 2020, excuse me, that we would be seeing a matchup at Beaver Stadium in 2022 of Tanner Morgan-led Minnesota against Sean Clifford-led Penn State with Kirk Shiraka coordinating Minnesota's offense, I would have said, what the hell has happened in the last 2 years? And what the hell happened was a global pandemic. But yeah, no, it's just kind of crazy. There's a lot of backstories to this, a lot of just different things. The last time these two teams played in 2019 was one of the games of the year in the Big Ten that season. If Jahan Dotson does not get tripped up by the turf monster in that game, there's a real possibility Penn State goes to the college football playoff in 2019, regardless of what would happen in Columbus 2 weeks later. So, yeah, there's a lot to this game, and I'm glad it's going to be in prime time. I'm glad it's going to be the whiteout, and I really hope that those players from Minnesota who have said about they're excited because they grew up watching the whiteout get the full brunt of the whiteout, and hopefully Penn State walks away victorious.
Indeed, we shall see. One last question before we go. Will says Notre Dame fans, some sort of Penn State is assigned to not join a conference as you haven't been quite successful. Do you wish you were independent, or are you happy? I guess happy being in a conference. I guess to say, even if an alternate universe, if Penn State never ends up joining the Big Ten, I would think they would have ended up in the Big East, maybe in the ACC. They would have ended up in a conference sooner or later. So I think it's kind of a moot point. They wouldn't. I just can't see any way there's still an independent in 2022. Notre Dame is just a very unique thing. I think especially helped they've had that deal with NBC for so long to have their own basically a network dedicated to showing their games. But even, the money with that compared to what, Big Ten could be throwing around to entice Notre Dame. And of course, you got USC, UCLA coming into the Big Ten starting in 2024. And Kevin Warren said today, or at least today at the media days, he left the door open to add more teams. And I would think they're still probably trying to court Notre Dame. And, we'll see. There may come a point where it's just, whatever offer Big Ten makes to them, maybe it's too much for them it's something they can't refuse. But who knows? I'm not a fortune teller.
No, I do think Notre Dame joining the Big Ten is a question of when, not if, especially now with the way college football expansion is going. And as for Penn State being an independent, I understand what they're saying, but I enjoy the Big Ten. I enjoy being not just in a conference, but in the Big Ten conference. And maybe this because I grew up, growing up in the 90s and 2000s, Penn State was always in the Big Ten in my life. When Penn State joined the Big Ten, I was 3 years old. I don't know a life where Penn State's not in the Big Ten. So I'm used to growing up and watching them play Michigan State, Ohio State, Minnesota, Iowa, whoever it may be. So to me, it's so normal. I wouldn't want it any other way. I love the rivalries that have been born over the years with the Michigan schools, with Ohio State. It's just so many great memories with those teams over the years. I wouldn't want anything else. But yeah, and again with Notre Dame, I really do think at this point Notre Dame joining the Big Ten is going to be a question of when, not if. And I'm all for it. As someone who grew up in West Central Pennsylvania, which is a very Catholic heavy area, everyone around here is either a Penn State fan or a Notre Dame fan, and it'll be a lot of fun to have that rivalry back. I think it's one of the more underrated. I don't even know if rivalry is the right word. I just feel like in Pennsylvania it's a bit of a rivalry because there are so many Catholics in Pennsylvania who will root for Notre Dame for that reason. It's going to be fun to have that back. Hopefully have it back, I should say. And yeah, I would love to see Penn State and Notre Dame play every year. So hopefully the Fighting Irish join the Big Ten and that'll come to fruition.
Indeed, I guess I would be more inclined to believe when you say when, not if. But when, who knows? Well, time will tell. Anyway, folks, thank you so much for all your questions and for watching, for tuning into our show here. If you like what you see, please do us a favor, like and subscribe at the Penn State channel on Voice of College Football. Really appreciate it, trying to get our follower count up on there. We're getting pretty close to the 500 mark, so hope we can get over that before the season starts September 1st. As far as what's in store for Marty and I, we'll definitely have another show in August when fall camp starts. And then, of course, before you know it, like I said, 5 weeks from tomorrow, it'll be season opener, September 1st against Purdue. And we'll be back to our, for the second year, we'll be back to our usual live post-game reaction show after that Purdue game. So you want to tune into that as well. Thank you once again, Tim Maiden, Black Sheep Diaries, Marty Leap, Black Sheep Diaries. Any final thoughts, Marty, before we part?
No, like I said, just very exciting to finally have football to talk about again. And man, can't wait. Like I said, 5 weeks from tomorrow, I will be anchored on my couch in the basement, beer in hand, watching Penn State. Man, it doesn't get much better than that.
Yes, indeed. It'll be before we know it. Anyway, folks, y'all have a good night.